Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we conclude with Part 6. Note and Appendix 1 and 2 from The Origin and Significance of the Great Pyramid by Staniland Wake. Note, one of the most curious series of relations found by the pyramidists is connected with the great coffer or sarcophagus of the king's chamber. John Taylor and his followers assert that this coffer is the same in capacity with the ark and with the laver of the Hebrew tabernacle, and that the molten sea of Solomon's temple was just 50 times such capacity and exactly equal in interior cubic space with the contents of the king's chamber itself. There is nothing absurd or improbable in there being some such relation between those vessels, if the pyramid was a temple dedicated to the god Seth. Judging indeed from the analogy presented by Hindu usage, the coffer was a sacred trough, filled by the priests on certain festivals with sacramental water and lotus flowers. This explanation of its use was given to Mr. St. John by some learned Brahmins, who said that the Great Pyramid was a temple, and that if it had an underground communication with the Nile, it must have been intended for the worship of Padma Devi. An early English writer, Mr. Shaw, would seem to have been much of the same opinion, as he thought the coffer was intended for the celebration of the mystical worship of Osiris, and he supposed it to have contained images, sacred vestments and utensils, or water for lustration. If for Osiris we substitute Seth, that opinion will be near the truth. The so-called king's chamber, of which an enthusiastic pyramidist says, the polished walls, fine materials, grand proportions, and exalted place eloquently tell of glories yet to come, if not the chamber of perfections of Cheops's tomb, was probably the place to which the initiate was admitted after he had passed through the narrow upward passage and the grand gallery, with its lowly termination, which gradually prepared him for the final stage of the sacred mysteries. Appendix 1. The following is Dr. Sprenger's account, taken from Arab and Syrian sources of Seth and Hermes in connection with the pyramids of Gizeh. He says, as quoted by Colonel Weiss in the second volume of his work, page 364, in Abul Feda's Historia Ante-Islamitica, edited by Fleischer, page 16, it is stated that Syria was one of the earliest inhabited countries, and that the Syriac language was the first that was spoken, that the Sabaean language was established by Seth and Edris, Enoch, that there was a town called Haran, to which pilgrims resorted, as they did to the two large pyramids of Gizeh, one of which was said to be the tomb of Edris, and the other of his son Siabi, where they celebrated as a festival the day on which the sun entered the sign of Aries. In the Melelwa Nahil manuscript 47 in Nikkata, Hermes is represented as the pupil of Agatha-daemon. In another account, manuscript 785, Uri's cat, Agatha-daemon is mentioned as a king of Egypt. The Sabaeans consider the Great Pyramid of Gizeh as the tomb of Seth, the second that of Hermes, and the third that of Isabi, while the Copts state that the Great Pyramid is the tomb of Surid, the second that of Hergib or Hokith, his brother, the third that of his son. Dr. Sprenger says further, in the Syrian Chronicle of Bar Hebraeus, translated into Latin by Professor Bruns, Enoch is said to have invented letters and architecture under the title of Trismegistus or of Hermes, to have built many cities and established laws, to have taught the worship of God and astronomy, to give alms and tithes, to offer up first fruits, libations, etc., to abstain from unlawful foods and drunkenness, and to keep feasts at the rising of the sun or new moons and at the ascent of the planets. His pupil was Agatha-daemon, Seth. According to other accounts, Asclepiades, a king renowned for wisdom, who when Enoch was translated set up an image in honor of him and thereby introduced idolatry. The Egyptians are supposed to have been descended from these persons. According to Haji Wolfer, they derived their knowledge from the Chaldeans, who are said to have been the Persian Magi, and to have originally come from Babylon. The statues of the Grecian Hermes, which seem to agree in name with the pyramids, Haram, were not images, but symbols of the deity and of the generative principle of nature in the form of obelisks. See Winckelmann, Book 1, Chapter 1, 1011. Statues of this kind, sacred to Hermes, were erected by the Greeks in honor of distinguished heroes, and the same allegorical allusion might have been kept in view when the pyramids were constructed as tombs. The Egyptian account, however, of Hermes is very obscure. That person is mentioned in the Buramikati as the son of Raman, son of Isfendiar, and to have arrived from the east. One of the sons of Anshirwan has also that title. Hormig is the name of the first day of the month, which is considered propitious for any undertaking, and it is a name of the planet Mercury. And Wednesday, dies Mercury, was sacred to him. For to most of the planets days were attributed in which their influence was supposed to govern human affairs, and even Mohammedan superstition assigned to children born on these days various qualities, characteristic of the heathen personifications of the different planets. Hermes is mentioned in many astrological treatises as presiding over the sixth climate. An idea, a period of time, or any remarkable occurrence were frequently connected with ideal persons in mythology, and when any similarity existed, received the same appellation. In this manner, there were 5 Hermes, and the 5th was the Oriental Hermes, who was worshipped by the Phoeniate, and is said to have fled after the death of Argus into Egypt, and to have civilized that country under the name of Thoth. This coincides with the account of Tifashi, which is evidently taken from an Egyptian tradition. Reference may also be made to Plato, Philel, 21, 24, Phaedro, page 340. Hermes was likewise distinguished by his wisdom, and was reported to have been buried in a great building called Abu Hermes, which together with another, the tomb of his wife or of his son, was afterwards named Haraman. These were the 2 large pyramids, and the form of their construction was called Makrut. Appendix 2, Masudi, who died in the year 967 AD, professes to relate the Coptic tradition which says that Surid ben Shaluk ben Semuni ben Termidun ben Tedresan ben Sal, one of the kings of Egypt before the flood, built the 2 great pyramids. And notwithstanding, they were subsequently named after a person called Sheddad ben Ad, that they were not built by the Adites, who could not conquer Egypt on account of the powers which the Egyptians possessed by means of enchantment, that the reason for building the pyramids was the following dream, which happened to Surid 300 years previous to the flood. It appeared to him that the earth was overthrown, and that the inhabitants were laid prostrate upon it, that the stars wandered confusedly from their courses and clashed together with a tremendous noise. The king, although greatly affected by this vision, did not disclose it to any person, but was conscious that some great event was about to take place. Soon afterwards, the king had another vision which so much alarmed him that he repaired to the temple of the sun, where, with great lamentations, he prostrated himself in the dust. Early in the morning, he assembled the chief priests from all the nomes of Egypt, 130 in number. No other persons were admitted to this assembly when he related his first and his second vision. The interpretation was declared to announce that some great event would take place. The high priest, whose name was Philemon or Iklimon, related a dream which he had had a year before, in which the firmament descended till it overshadowed him and the king like a vault, as they sat upon the tower of Amasis. The king then directed the astrologers to ascertain by taking the altitude whether the stars foretold any great catastrophe, and the result announced an approaching deluge. The king ordered them to inquire whether or not this calamity would befall Egypt, and they answered, "Yes, the flood will overwhelm the land and destroy a large portion of it for some years." He ordered them to inquire if the earth would again become fruitful, or if it would continue to be covered with water. They answered that its former fertility would return. The king demanded what would then happen. He was informed that a stranger would invade the country, kill the inhabitants, and seize upon their property, and that afterwards a deformed people, coming from beyond the Nile, would take possession of the kingdom, upon which the king ordered the pyramids to be built, and the predictions of the priests to be inscribed upon columns and upon the large stones belonging to them, and he placed within them his treasures and all his valuable property, together with the bodies of his ancestors. He also ordered the priests to deposit within them written accounts of their wisdom and acquirements in the different arts and sciences. Subterraneous channels were also constructed to convey to them the waters of the Nile. He filled the passages with talismans, with wonderful things and idols, and with the writings of the priests, containing all manner of wisdom, the names and properties of medical plants, and the sciences of arithmetic and geometry, that they might remain as records for the benefit of those who would afterwards comprehend them. After describing the construction of the three pyramids, Masudi says, "In the Eastern Great Pyramid were inscribed the heavenly spheres and figures representing the stars and planets in the forms in which they were worshipped. The king also deposited the instruments and the thuribula with which his forefathers had sacrificed to the stars, and also their writings, likewise the position of the stars and their circles, together with the history and chronicles of time past, of that which is to come, and of every future event which would take place in Egypt. He placed there also colored basins for lustration and sacrificial purposes, with pure water and other matters." After referring to the deposit of the bodies of the priests in the colored third pyramid, Masudi describes the guardians assigned by the king to each pyramid. The guardian of the eastern pyramid was an idol of speckled granite, standing upright with a weapon like a spear in his hand. A serpent was wreathed round his head, which seized upon and strangled whoever approached by twisting round his neck, when it again returned to its former position upon the idol. When everything was finished, he caused the pyramids to be haunted with living spirits, and offered up sacrifices to prevent the intrusion of strangers and of all persons excepting those who by their conduct were worthy of admission. The author then says that according to the Coptic account, the following passage was inscribed in Arabic upon the pyramids: "I, Surid the King, have built these pyramids and have finished them in 61 years. Let him, who comes after me and imagines himself a king like me, attempt to destroy them in 600. To destroy is easier than to build. I have clothed them with silk. Let him try to cover them with mats." Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.